To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? John and I are having a conversation off air about parenting, which
we haven't got the hang of yet.
We haven't got the hang of yet. 6 kids between the pair of us. And yeah, our parenting, it certainly wouldn't be in the, let's say if there was a Leaving Cert ordinary level parenting exam, I'm not sure that they would take a leaf out of our book and anything. But we are going to talk about the Leaving Cert and economics now in 2 seconds, John. Yes. You've already had your Leaving Cert experience.
Oh, I have. Yeah. In fairness, there was the last one to go through the Leaving Cert. But when the results came out, all the mates came around to our house. They all clinked into the house. And
age-old custom. Age-old Irish tradition.
It was really funny, and just the noise level went way up, and they stayed a few hours, and then they went off into town to some club. And I was pottering around the kitchen at about 3 a.m. And she arrives back in starving with a head in her. So I start making toasted cheesies.
That is so sweet, but John. That is so sweet, but John, the very first rule of being a dad, could you imagine putting the key in the door?
I wasn't disapproving.
You're trying to tip-tap, to kind of go across the kitchen, and you see this image in the corner of the alpha in an armchair saying, "What time do you think this is?"
It was like a mate of mine who came in after a big night out, and his mother says, "Will you get into bed?" And he goes, "Yes, I will, the next time it comes around."
Anyway, speaking of Leaving Certs and things, we're going to start, John, with a Leaving Cert question about Taylor Swift. And we're going to apply the economics of Taylor Swift and Taylor Swift tickets to a dilemma which is not just prevalent in Ireland. We'll use Ireland as a good example, but is a prevalent dilemma all over the English-speaking countries, which is why can we not develop on time, on budget, creating the amount of houses, roads, infrastructure, railways, schools, hospitals that we need? Why can we not do that? And why can our continental brethren seem to be able to do it better? But let's start with Taylor, because I know you're deep down, you're kind of a fan, and she's on the Leaving Cert course.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan. She's great. But so she's popped up everywhere, including the Leaving Cert.
Go on. So tell me.
So this is the question. Now, there is a diagram involved here, but it says, the diagram below represents the market for tickets for Taylor Swift concert in the Aviva Stadium in June 2024. Now, there's 2 axes, the number 1 line and number 2 line. Number 1 going up, vertical, and the other one is number 2, horizontal. And then there is the supply, which is a vertical line because it's a fixed supply. And then there's a sliding number 3 line, which is the demand curve.
All right.
And it says, here's the question. Number 1, clearly label each of the lines 1 to 3 and show on the diagram, 1, the market equilibrium price for the tickets.
Okay.
The market equilibrium quantity of the tickets.
Right. So,
and the second question is, explain the relationship between the price of tickets and the supply of tickets as shown in the diagram.
Okay. So,
take it from here.
John has just given us a question on the Irish Leaving Cert ordinary economics exam. So, ordinary level. In old money, we used to call it pass.
Yeah.
This should be taken by every single member of our cabinet. This basic idea. Can they pass a ordinary level economics exam which pertains to Taylor Swift tickets? So the idea here is there are only X amount of Taylor Swift tickets, right? There is whatever the capacity of the Aviva is. Let's say it's 60,000, right? So that means the supply is fixed. So it doesn't matter what the demand is. If the demand exceeds that, those tickets are still 60,000. There can be no more and no less. So
buying or selling tickets. Buying or selling tickets.
Anyone buying or selling a ticket. Exactly. Everyone buying or selling a ticket. John used to love a pram full of arrows outside Lansdowne Road.
And a few bruised apples.
A few bruised apples, a few arrows. In actual fact, I remember going to a rugby or a soccer match. One of the elements, she's selling arrows, Twixes, cans of Coke, bruised apples. And 2 lads I know went up there. And of course, when she slips out under them, he says, I've got a few Viagras if you need them for later, lads. Enterprising. Okay. Anyway, let us go on. So basically, what the question is asking us is what happens when the whole world wants to go to Taylor Swift. So the demand is almost infinite and there is a fixed supply. What actually happens is the Taylor Swift tickets on the black market go through the roof, which is why you get kids paying 500 euros and 1,000 euros, 800 euros. Why? Because when you limit supply, so if Taylor Swift would have played in Dublin, in order to make sure the price of tickets played the same, she'd be still playing now, as far as I can see, right? Because the demand is so big, right? Taylor, go on.
Big encore.
Big encore, exactly. Give us some of your top 10. So she'd be still playing now. Why? Because the demand is so huge. Now, that's what the Leaving Cert ordinary level is trying to explain to the students, or trying to the students to explain to the examiner, that you understand the basic concept, which is when you fix supply and when demand is rising rapidly, okay, what actually happens to prices and what happens to quantities. Now, if you fix supply, it means your quantity cannot change. So all the adjustment happens in price, which is exactly why parents listening to this show, Taylor Swift fans listening to this show will remember paying through the nose for Taylor Swift tickets, because that happens when you have massive demand and fixed supply. So take that model in your head.
Yeah.
And let's now go to a cabinet meeting in Ireland, right? Which I believe happened on a Tuesday morning, dropping at the same time as this podcast. We drop on Tuesday morning, they have a Tuesday morning. So we should go in with this ordinary level, right? And say, Lava Suis, who has done economics in the Leaving Cert? I'm not sure there'll be many of them. Lava Suis, again, who can answer this question?
That's hands up, by the way.
That's hands up, by the way. And the reason we say that is the following. This Taylor Swift dilemma encapsulates exactly what is going wrong in Ireland, which is the following. We have a supply problem in Ireland. So if you stand back in economics, for the last, I would say, John, actually forever, right? For the last hundreds of years, Ireland has always had a demand side problem in the economy. We have had deficient demand. We couldn't generate enough jobs. We couldn't generate enough companies. We couldn't generate enough investment. So the demand side of the economy was always a problem. And it manifested itself in high rates of emigration because people couldn't get a job, and high rates of unemployment because people couldn't get work, and low levels of wages and income because there was loads and loads of people competing for the jobs, so wages could fall. That has all reversed on its head. And now we have too much demand.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you get that? Because we have immigrants coming in here, adding pressures to the whole system. Okay, number one, demand problems. We have full employment in effect. Everybody who looks for a job, who wants to have a job, will probably get a job. We have, if you talk to recruiters, we have massive problems in the labor force of not being able to get the right people for jobs. We have housing market dysfunction in the sense that housing market prices have risen 10% in the last year alone. We have mad traffic and queues in our cities, all around our cities, which again is a function of too many cars on the road, not enough capacity on the road. So everything in Ireland screams too much demand, like too much demand for the Taylor Swift tickets, right?
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that in basic Leaving Cert ordinary level economics is you boost supply. So what you do is you try and make sure that at every hand's turn, you are increasing the capacity. So you're building more houses, you're building more apartments, you're building more railways, you're building more hospitals, you're building more schools, you're building more turbines, you're building more infrastructure, everything that we would regard as infrastructure. You're building. And if you don't do that, and like the Taylor Swift problem, you fix your supply, what you're going to get, surprise, surprise, is inflation and hyperinflation in areas. So this is economics, as the Americans call it, 101. We'll call it past economics in the Leaving Cert. This should be presented at the very, very first cabinet meeting next week. Why? Because almost everything that we are seeing from the Irish state is creating impediments to supply, which means they don't understand the basic Taylor Swift dilemma, which is the price of tickets will go through the roof, the price of houses will go through the roof, the price of construction will go through the roof, the price of children's hospitals will go through the roof, the price of everything, right? So when you look at what's happening in Ireland, if you have a supply problem, not a demand problem, you need to change your thinking. Now, I can understand, I can accept, I can really empathize with advisors and older politicians who lived in the world of deficient demand, or who may well be coming from the left of centre view, who believe that we can always fix the economy by adding more demand. It's a very Keynesian view of the economy, that basically anything that is wrong with the economy can be fixed by spending more money.
Right.
But John,
Okay.
if you look at this country, we have, and just think about this figure, right? Just think about this figure. If everything was fixed by spending more money, we would have a fantastic, pristine infrastructure. I'll give you a figure. Our government spending has increased by 47% in the last 5 years, from 71 billion to 105 billion euros per annum. And have we seen any material impact on trains, railways, houses, roads, etc.? Our infrastructure has remained almost the same.
So what have we been spending on?
We're spending on current spending. Now, that's understandable as the economy grows. But my point is, we are not spending on minimizing the impediments to the supply of goods and services in the economy, most
Right.
materially in the infrastructure area. So we get it back, right? If you scan the papers every day, what you see is again and again and again, the state and the apparatuses of the state, and by that I mean the planning, the legal system, the political system, where those three interact, what they are doing constantly is rewarding the few and penalizing the many by rewarding vested interests. I'll give you one great example. Last week, our new finance minister, a fellow called Jack Chambers,
Yeah.
decided in his infinite wisdom to postpone imposing a tax on people who own land in places that have been zoned residential and are not actually making those lands available for residential.
I know. I saw that. I just thought it was unbelievable.
It's dreadful stuff. It is dreadful stuff. So this goes exactly to the root of the Taylor Swift problem. Unless you increase the potential amount of land that can be built on, you are fixing supply. Now, why are they doing it? Because they have decided that the number of farmers, right, called active versus inactive farmers, that some farmers will be penalized and have to pay the tax. And the farmers have said, we can't pay the tax, we've no money. The whole point of the tax was to coax the farmers to sell the land for residential development in order to avoid the tax. So that means the tax is working. When the more the farmers complain, the more the tax is working. But the more the farmers complain, 8 or 9 weeks out to election, John, the more Fine Gael lose a certain small amount of crucial support, which is the Irish farming community, which used to be huge. It's not that big anymore, but it's still significant.
Can I just ask you though, like when they were developing this policy, they would have, as they usually do, bring in one of the big four, whatever, to do some sort of big consultation and report and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. At that stage, was this issue with the farmers not highlighted? Did it not crop up?
Of course it must have cropped up. Of course it must have cropped up. But the worst thing is that the zoned residential areas are around public infrastructure, trains, railways, roads, right? There should not be farming beside public infrastructure. Those zones should be zoned for residential because it actually uses the public infrastructure. And that's the whole point of it, is to basically say to the farmers, you know what? You have a huge empty country here, massively empty country. We need to build on this land beside nodes of development.
Yeah.
So of course this must have happened. But you've just highlighted something interesting there, because the big four, which I call, frankly, government adjacent agencies, the big four consultancies, because they wrote these reports or may have written these reports, right? They have no skin in the game. And every time they write a report, it diminishes and degrades state capacity to run the country. Because every time we outsource consultants' report to punters who have no vested interest in the actual outcome, because they will not be penalized either way, what you're doing is you're degrading state capacity. And it's interesting, in this argument I'm making, what I want is more state capacity, not less state capacity. Sometimes people think when you're making an argument for imposing taxes on farmers who are lucky enough to own land in the first place, which is a massive asset, which is increasing dramatically in terms of the amount of wealth it's generating for them. I'm not making a libertarian argument. I'm making an argument for more state capacity to actually end up running the country in the way in which it should be run, which is efficiently.
The argument from the farmers, though, would be that their margins are being squeezed more and more, regardless of the value of the land, and it's harder to make a living.
Well, this is what I would call the paradox of land, John. As the yield on land falls, and therefore the ability to make a living falls, you would expect farmers to sell the land to somebody who will actually get a greater yield in the land by building residential. But that doesn't happen. So what actually happens bizarrely in Irish farming is farmers hold on to the land even as the yield in land is falling. And that I have no idea why it's. I call it the paradox of land. That you should see a massive churn in land as the yield is falling, but you don't. And what I'm saying is when the land is close to these residential zones, this is a one-off opportunity for the farmer to sell and to actually generate some money from the land. Because, of course, the difference between agricultural land and residential land is dramatic. Now, I've always felt that the state should capture at least 80% of that increase so that the owner shouldn't just get a windfall gain. The state should get 80 or 90% of the increase in that land, and they can use that then to actually build the public infrastructure, which is bizarrely how Hong Kong and many countries or many cities pay for public infrastructure.
Yeah.
This is how they do it. It's completely logical. But in Ireland, of course, we don't do it. So back to Taylor Swift, we are fixing supply. And then you look at, in our area, John, down the road from us in Dunleary, amazing case. Do you remember the old Ted Castles?
I do, yeah.
That has been slated to, I think, have about 200 apartments in it, right? It's in walking distance of not one, but two dart stations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great location as well, beside the sea, beside the West Pier. And it's been derelict for years.
Beside the throbbing heart of Dunleary, John.
Beside the top hat, where Nirvana played.
Nirvana and Sonic Youth played together, which is an amazing gig. And the Jam before them. And I think the Clash even before them, maybe.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
But I come back to this issue, right, John? We have a housing crisis. So the urgency needs to be that local opposition, which is the will of the minority, should not take precedence over the responsibility to the majority, which is people need homes. If we're always genuflecting to NIMBYism, to local people saying, I don't want those apartments near my home, all that sort of stuff, all you do is you increase the price of apartments and the rest of the country pays for it. And of course, the young pay for it more, and that's what we're seeing. So again, an amazing thing in Dunleary, a really bog standard, ugly yellow house built in 1850 or 1890 or something, which is the Ted Castles house in Dunleary. If you see it, it's a joke. That has been highlighted as a house of architectural significance and merit. And can you believe it? The planning application has been refused.
Wow.
So 200 flats that could be built there are no longer built. An issue in Goatstown a couple of years ago, looking to build 800 flats for students 800 meters away from UCD, ideal location, and it can refused. Why? Because local people agitated through judicial review to say that and I mean, nothing against Goatstown, but it's hardly fucking Sorrento or Capri, you know?
Yeah.
That the local beauty is going to be upset by and changed by these 8-story apartment blocks when we know that UCD and UCD students have a massive housing shortage. So you can go on and on and on. All these cases are where the legal system is being used to fix supply. And in effect, it is like people taking Taylor Swift tickets off the market and making the problem worse, not better. And again, what you see is because of judicial reviews, because of the way in which people are able to and allowed to block, to delay, to increase the price of all sorts of developments, we're fixing supply. And surprise, surprise, prices rise. And you see this everywhere, John. Down in Wicklow, not that long ago, a local fisherman decided to have a objection to one of those big wind turbine, a German wind turbine initiative. Now, we need wind turbines to
Yeah.
accord with our climate change objectives, right? We need this.
Yeah.
And of course, the fisherman goes to court, gets a settlement. He's happy enough. Maybe his claims were legit. Maybe they weren't legit. I presume they were if the court upholds them. But what you do then, of course, you delay the project. And don't think that these companies aren't talking to each other, these wind turbine companies. And they're saying, like, man, why would you bother doing something in Ireland when you can do something in Denmark without all the hassle?
Yeah.
So all the while, everything, you see the metro link, the amount of objections going into building a metro, you see all these initiatives, John. What they do is they gum up supply. So what I would recommend for the new government coming in is the new government does what I would call a mine sweeping activity, a mine sweeping operation. Because all these little mines are mines that go off that reduce dramatically the incentive to build homes and public infrastructure. So that what we have to do is we need to get these things out of the way.
Yeah.
Because they're a legacy of all sorts of various different governments and additions and what have you. Now, don't get me wrong. People have a right to complain and to object. That is a democratic right. But we also have a responsibility to the majority of the people to enable people to get houses at a fair price and enable people to live where they want or at least close to where they want and enable people to actually have a quality of life in Ireland which accords to our alleged wealth. And it's not just in Ireland. You see this all over. It's in the UK, it's in America, it's in Canada, it's in every English-speaking country.
So where do you draw the line? Like, how can you satisfy both sides?
I don't think you can. I think you can nudge towards satisfying both sides. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? Ireland signed up to a thing called the Aarhus Environmental Convention. Aarhus is a city in Denmark. And the idea there was to try and meet our environmental targets. And they introduced a section 50B into the Planning and Development Act, right? And this means that when an environmental issue is raised, John, the court cannot award legal costs against the applicant, even if their claims are ultimately unsuccessful. So that means that the barriers to lodging such complaints have been all but removed. And unsurprisingly now, there's a flurry of complaints undermining our environmental policy. I'll give you an example, this wind farm, all of which is undermining our overall environmental policy on the grounds of protecting the environment. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up.
Yeah, it reminds me of, do you remember Swampy back in the day? He was the big environmental campaigner against, because there was a flurry of bypasses in the UK, actually.
Yes, I do.
And then also here in the Glen of the Downs. And it was Swampy who was, digging tunnels and preventing these motorways. A lot of these motorways were built anyway, and there's been very little environmental degradation, actually.
Well, the Glen of the Downs
term
is a great example in Wicklow. And that extension of the motorway was held up for 5 years.
Yeah.
I'll just quote you a law firm called Clark Hill in the 2023 report, okay? This is a quote from them, and they're talking about offshore wind and renewable energy and wider climate goals. And they just said, here's a quote. All of these goals and ambitions are, and I quote, at risk due to the challenges posed by costly third-party appeals, expected judicial reviews, delays in planning consent, and concerns over capital investment in ports. Again, all of these things restrict supply. We go back to Taylor Swift. And if you look at last year, Ishka, Éireann, which used to be called Irish Water, you'll always know, John, if an Irish development gets into difficulty and a company gets into difficulty, the first thing we do is we change the name. And usually we change the name to Irish, just so you know, right? So Irish Water, that was in all those water complaints, right? But in fairness, the company's chief executive, he points out the idea that something like Irish Water, if you want to actually change the water infrastructure, you've got to spend lots and lots of money.
Yeah.
And you've got to have big, big projects, right? Because this water is essential to life. And he's making the point that all the legal challenges and the license permissions, et cetera, means that he was saying a decade can pass before a project which has been green-lighted can be implemented. And the ironic thing is, if a decade passes, the original planning permission fails, recedes, and you have to start again.
Why does it take a decade to get everything.
What he was just saying is in some of their big ideas, there's objections. There are consultants' reports. There are delays in planning. There are delays in this. And he's saying, like, it can take up to 10 years to get through all of these
Wow.
things.
Okay.
Now, here's the chief executive of, a national infrastructural company. So the point is, at every hand's turn, Ireland, whether it's in residential, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in rail, whether it's in metros, we are open season for NIMBYism because our legal system is set up to facilitate it. And it's far, far too easy for a small group of individuals to compromise the long-term welfare of the majority. I'll give you another example, and it's kind of shocking. In 2023, 42% of judicial reviews. Now, think what a judicial review is, John. A judicial review is asking a judge to adjudicate on the constitutionality of a development, of a building.
Yeah.
So the Constitution, which is a very blunt document at the best of times, is in some way hijacked by judicial reviews. So rather than have an architect or a planner or a civil servant to adjudicate on whether or not something is fair, democratic, and efficient, we're asking judges, which is bizarre, to reinterpret the Constitution, to actually use the Constitution as the final arbiter. I mean, this is nonsense. If you ask a Dutch or a Danish person, they'd laugh. But I'll just give you the figure, right? 42% of ongoing judicial review cases in 2023, so last year, related to large residential projects, not infrastructure, but residential projects. And this is equated to a delay of nearly 15,000 housing units that would have been built, not being built. This is just from judicial reviews alone. That means 15,000 people, 15,000 families, in effect, who are paying the price set by the objections of the very few. And all the while, house prices go through the roof. And this imposes a massive financial burden on everyone, but particularly the young, right? So what we have is a system which is entirely jaundiced towards the rather nebulous rights of existing property owners over the rights of citizens to try and acquire a property or a home at a decent price. And surprise, surprise, as ordinary level economics, the Leaving Cert would tell us we are having massive inflationary problems.
Okay, Mark. So I mean, this is probably not unique to Ireland, I assume. So what do other countries do? Well, before you answer that, let's do a bit of this. So our whole system seems to be hamstrung by NIMBYism.
Yes.
So, like, how do other countries, I know it's not unique to Ireland, but how do other countries deal with this kind of stuff?
Well, you know what always intrigues me, John? Every time we have an election in Europe, right, a European election, all Irish political parties say Ireland has to be at the heart of Europe. And being at the heart of Europe means being more European. And being more European means shifting your legal system away from common law to more or less Napoleonic law, which is the European legal system. If we really want to be European, we need to have a root and branch total reform of the way we do business to make us more European at the moment, right? So that's just one thing. If you look at the Netherlands and the Scandinavian nations and Germany, these three Northern European systems, they all have developed planning systems that ensure timely infrastructure delivery. Why? Because they focus on early engagement. So you get everyone around the table, all the stakeholders say, listen, guys, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
What's your objections? What are your requirements? How do we get everybody on board? Then legal predictability, which means that we say, okay, once we've agreed on this, there will be no unpredictable legal challenges. So everyone's happy, right? And you integrate your environmental concerns from the very outset, right? From the very, very outset. So you say, okay, well, we have problems here. We're worried about this. We're worried about that. Integrate them all. In the Netherlands, for example, which seems to be the exemplar for this, because the Netherlands is this incredibly densely populated country, which is environmentally extremely efficient and is environmentally extremely concerned. So they have this idea that they emphasize early meetings with everyone, like really early, right? Local government, environmental groups, community representatives, everyone gets involved at the beginning of the planning process. And by doing this, by saying to the environmental people, okay, what's your concerns? Great, okay, we'll bring them on board. Saying to the local community, what's your concerns? But only to an extent. Like, you don't have a right to completely and utterly oppose residential developments. This is not a constitutional right you have. You have to be part of the community. But everyone gets on board. And of course, the Dutch system there minimizes the risk of any legal disputes later on in the project's life cycle because they're already fixed.
Yeah.
Now, that seems to me to be totally logical. But in order to do that, you have to change the way in which we do business so that the very few cannot, after a decision has been taken and after, for example, foundations have been laid and a project is underway, say, hold on a second, I don't agree with this. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to court to stop you. So we can't have that. So in fairness, developers, the local government, community groups have to come together before, and not in an antagonistic way, to say, look, we need to do this and we're going to do it. How best to do it in the context of everyone being feeling a little bit happy. So that would seem to me to be ideal. So just get the Dutch system and cut and paste it and change it. Now, of course, who benefits from the present Irish system? Who benefits really? Obviously, the objectors benefit, but they don't really benefit. You know, if you, for example, live beside that site in Dunleary, and it's not built on, it still is an eyesore. It's a big hole in the ground. So you're not really benefiting. Like, you might have a Pyrrhic victory and you think, oh my goodness, I stood up for the residents, but you don't really benefit.
Well, that house now is a squat, you know that?
It's a squat. I know. That's amazing. That's amazing. So nobody really benefits. What people don't understand is communities benefit from diverse, growing populations. That's what breathes life back into an area. That part of Dunleary, the lower end of Georgia Street, this is very local, but I'm sure if you apply it to your own town, in your own part of your own city, wherever you're listening, you'll see the same thing. What it actually benefits from is you need people, because people breathe life into an area. If you keep areas devoid of people, then you get dark streets, you get unsafe streets, you get dereliction, you get vandalism, all that stuff. People breathe life into an area. So what these resident objectors don't understand is they're actually undermining the long-term life and vibrancy of their own area by consistently undermining efforts to develop. And our legal system, of course, seems to allow for these, what I would call unreasonable objections. Now, again, who benefits from this? There's what we could call, John, a consultant class, particularly in Ireland. Legions of advisors, lawyers, freelance planning experts and the like. All of these people make a fine living, taking a little cut every time there's an objection, an exorbitant claim, or a financial compensation payout. These are the sort of people who benefit. And these professionals enable a culture of objecting. And worse so, they do so in the name of democracy. We're just standing up for the protection of the individual. But here is the nub. If protecting the right of the individual or a small group of individuals comes at the cost of the many, what are we to do? And I think what we are to do is simply take the Dutch system and say, let's just superimpose it. A bit like last week's podcast on trains. You know, maybe it was a bit inflammatory to say, let the Chinese come in, but maybe let the Japanese come in, or the Italians, or somebody who can build this and say, you know what? You just build. And in so doing, what we do is we take away all these impediments to supply. Because we could end by going back to Taylor Swift, because you know that all roads used to lead to Rome, but now all roads lead to Taylor, right? You know that, okay?
Yes, of course. You being the biggest Swiftie of all.
Exactly. So going back to the Taylor Swift Leaving Cert example, that ordinary level question should be pasted like Martin Luther's 96 objections to the papacy on every cabinet door, every advisor's door. It should be photocopied in old school, photocopied and put on the agenda of the cabinet this morning, because if they don't get basic Leaving Cert ordinary level economics, John, we are in big, big trouble.